So right now with my generation, there's a huge craze that's going on when it comes to investing, right? You've seen stocks like GameStop, AMC, you've seen cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin, and all of this hype surrounding certain investment platforms. The reason I'm doing this video and what we're going to be talking about today is making the distinction between investing and gambling. They're not the same, all right? So investing is typically expending money with the anticipation of a profit coming back in return, all right? So when you put your money into something, you obviously want to get a profit back, right? Well, when you take a look at gambling, gambling is kind of throwing your money in, not necessarily having a good understanding of what you're putting your money into. All right, and I think that's the distinction that needs to be made here. So let's say, for instance, that you are going to jump on the bandwagon of putting your money into one of these hyped stocks or these hyped cryptocurrencies. You need to think, do you have an understanding of what you're putting your money into? Or are you just gambling, riding the wave of other people that are putting their money in, and you're just essentially falling into the FOMO crowd, the fear of missing out, trying to capitalize off of the pumps that are taking place? What are you doing? Are you investing, or are you gambling by just throwing your money and trying to rack it up pretty quick? All right. So a lot of people that I know are getting into the crypto space. I myself have been in the crypto space for an extremely long time. I've had a stock portfolio for a very long time. I'm going to share a quick story with you about how I got burned and could have made a lot of money, but only ended up making, a little bit of money. So back in 2017, I was graduating from college. Now, when I graduated, I had about $50,000 saved, a little over $50,000 saved. So, and we're going to get into where that money came from later, but I had about $50,000. And a good buddy of mine tipped me off that Ethereum was going to be added to Coinbase. Now, I had already missed the initial rise of Bitcoin at the time, or so I thought. And I saw Ethereum. I did some research on the smart contracts and the capabilities of the network, and I said, this is a viable technology. Not only is it a viable technology, but the fact that the largest exchange, Coinbase in the United States, is adopting it for their client base, which was predominantly just Bitcoin prior to this, that was huge, right? So at the time, Ethereum was about $30 a piece. I put about $30,000 in. Over time, without getting into specifics, I ended up growing that portfolio to over $400,000 over the course of the next year and a half, roughly. All right, now, here's the thing. I invested in the technology, but then it turned into a little bit of a gamble because my greed took over. Okay, so what ended up happening to me was series of dopamine hits, right? Because you would, at that time, you would refresh your phone and you would make $20,000, or at least you would on, paper when you took a look at your app. That gives you a dopamine hit and you get this sensation of, oh my God, of winning, right? I can only imagine, I'm not a gambler, I don't go to casinos or anything, but I would imagine that same feeling that I got is the same feeling that keeps people going back to a casino. That rush of adrenaline, that, oh my God, look at this, right? So you kind of get a little hooked on that. Not only that, but your greed gets the best of you. So, listen, I end up racking this portfolio up to 400 grand. All right, 400 G's. All right, it's a lot of money. All right, and it's easy to say, cash out, man. Why didn't you cash out? You should have cashed out. Well, it's easy to say that unless you're in the situation when you're refreshing and you're seeing your money fly, 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 and then, if any of you are well-versed in the crypto space, you know how it goes. As fast as it goes up, it almost goes back down at double the speed. All right? So here's what ended up happening. I ended up riding the wave all the way to the top, started riding it down. The portfolio ended up going down to about $170,000. And at that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I was barely sleeping because I was so inexperienced when it came to investing, and I didn't know how to handle that at the time. Okay, so I ended up pulling out at $170,000, threw 50 grand in my bank account, and then on top of that, I ended up taking the additional money, and I made the mistake of gambling it. There was a handful of technologies getting media attention at the time, one of which was EOS. EOS was shooting up, so put money into EOS, ended up riding that portfolio that was at $120,000 all the way down to $30,000. Okay, and at that point I said, listen, that's my initial investment. I'm going to cap out here. Did pretty well, ended up making about $50,000. Far cry from 400, but what are you going to do, right? So that was my initial experience. Now, the more and more research that I conducted into the crypto space after the fact, and I kept that money in the exchange, by the way, there was a few handful of events that you can study and you can take a look at. Okay, so one of these big events was the halvening. The halvening is essentially when the Bitcoin blockchain is diverged in the difficulty to mine the blocks, which mining, by the way, is essentially the facilitation of coins being transferred from A to B. The miner gets a reward off of the block, which is a new piece of a Bitcoin. That goes into their wallet. That's how Bitcoins are created. And that's why mining is so popular right now and the prices of graphic cards are through the roof. Okay? So, when a halvening takes place, which the trajectory is every 4 years, give or take, there's going to be a halvening. When that happens, the difficulty or the reward gets cut in half. The difficulty gets doubled, which means the reward gets cut in half. Okay? And when that happens, the amount of new Bitcoin coming into circulation drastically goes down. Okay? And simple supply and demand economics here. The lower the supply, and if demand stayed stagnant, the price goes up. If we lower the supply and the demand goes up, then price shoots through the roof. All right? Just look at PlayStation 5. It's a perfect example. The demand was crazy high. The supply was crazy low. Next thing you know, people are selling them for $1,000 on eBay. All right? So, same thing, same principle here. Basic economic principles here. All right, so I understood that, and that's why last year, prior to the whole pandemic, I was thinking about jumping back in because I knew there was going to be a halvening in August. Well, lo and behold, crypto market crashed, stock market crashed, and I jumped back in. All right, I threw about 30,000. I think I had a little over 30,000 in the account. Ended up throwing that back in there, and then rode that wave up, and it's been a great year thus far. But the moral of the story here is when you go to invest, okay, and I'm using that term investing, and the way that I like to define it is having an understanding of the medium you're placing your money upon. If you do not have an understanding and you're simply trying to ride a wave, trying to profit, and you feel a sense of FOMO essentially, right, and you find yourself tempted to gamble, more than likely you're putting your money in at the wrong time. You've heard people say buy low, sell high, right? Very basic principle. Well, if your fear of missing out is stemming from growth of a particular asset class, be it a stock or anything, well, guess what? You're buying on the way up, which can be good, but you could also be the one left holding the bag when it comes back down the other way. All right? And that's another thing that I want to talk about is buying dips. A lot of people are talking about that right now. Well, if you want to do that, just again, educate yourself. And this is, by the way, this is in no way, shape, or form financial advice. These are just principles that I go upon. And I want to educate the people out there at a high level without getting too granular, so that way you have a good understanding. So on the way back down, you find yourself in a rough spot because you're like, oh, buy the dip, and it's coming back down. Maybe it was at 50K, and now it's down to 45, and you're like, all right, I'm going to jump back in. Well, you could be just catching a falling knife at that point, right? Because it's going to go down, it's going to shoot right through you and keep going, and then there goes your cash. So that's something that I want you to think about when it comes to what you're doing with your money. Now, there are some alternatives out there and some ways to place your money that are less of a gamble, more of an investment. Let's take real estate, for instance. Real estate is a time-tested wealth generation tool that's been used since the history of time. Because people, no matter what happens to the economy, no matter what happens to the world, people will always need a place to live, so the demand will always be there. And it's growing, especially in metropolitan areas, which is driving a lot of people out, especially my generation, where the idea of buying a home is almost ludicrous because of the cost of real estate. You can take advantage of that by investing in real estate yourself. Now, I want to say one thing here, and this is purely an opinion of mine, but I don't consider a home, a single door dwelling, an investment. And here's why. And a lot of people will consider their home an investment. The reason being is because you're always going to need a place to live. So if you buy a house, you're always going to need to live in a home, right? Safe to say. So when you think about that and you want to roll that money over into something else, could you sell the house and go back to renting? You certainly could, but most people don't do that. They don't actually liquidate because then you have to pay taxes on it, and it's this whole nine. But let's say you Have your house paid off. You're retired. Well, guess what? You still have to pay property taxes. You're still going to have to replace that roof, the gutter, the water heater, the electrical, all of these things. So I think a lot of people get confused thinking that their house is an asset when it really falls into a liability class because it's going to end up costing you money. An asset should produce income, not cost you. Do you understand? All right, now that's not to say don't buy a house or anything like that, but it is something worth considering because a lot of people don't make that distinction. Now, if you get into multifamily real estate, commercial real estate, something that's actually generating revenue for you, well, that would be considered an investment because it's producing revenue, right? So these are just things that I want you to think about when it comes to investing or gambling. And I want you to sit down and really ask yourself, what am I doing? Am I investing or am I gambling? Thank you so much for listening, guys. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on my website, RTBTransformations.com. And as always, I offer personalized fitness coaching and personal development plans. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it, guys. And with that, I'm out of here.